Welcome, everybody. Today, I think we're going to deal with a very, very interesting topic, alternative forms of business organization called cooperatives and codetermination. So let's get right into it. Uh, the so we'll be talking about the cooperative movement and codetermination. And I think what we'll see is some very interesting business models that have proven their success. So we'll be talking about sort of the granddaddy of all the cooperatives, the Mondragon Cooperative, but even an older system in Emilia-Romagna. And we'll be talking about cooperatives worldwide. We'll be looking at codetermination, a method used widely in Europe. And finally, we'll talk about theory and praxis. Let's start with the Mondragon cooperatives. And let's start with the history. Now, you have to start with the Basques and with the Spanish Civil War. Who are the Basques? They're actually an ethnic group in Spain that predates the modern age. They predate the Romans. They predate the Muslim occupation of Spain. Nobody knows exactly where the Basques come from. They have their own language, and they've maintained that language and culture through Roman occupation, through the barbarian Visigothic occupation, um, through all of the modern age. Their language is not related to any other language on the face of the earth. But through all this cultural turmoil, they've been able to preserve a culture that goes back far beyond any recorded history that we have. But in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, they were on the wrong side. And the fascists under Francisco Franco won the war, and he was not very happy with the Basque people, and he took efforts to punish them. He was not a forgiving man. Now, into this situation came Don Jose Arizmendiarrieta. It took me about 20 minutes to learn how to pronounce that. Don Jose was a Basque priest, and he had been arrested by the fascists. After he was released, he was assigned to the parish of the village of Mondragon in the Basque country. Now, seeing the plight of his people, Don Jose wanted to do more than just hold mass. He wanted to reinforce the culture and build up the business enterprises of the Basque region. So this is Don Jose. Now, Don Jose was very well versed in Catholic social teaching and in distributism. So he started by forming an educational group, the Hezibida El Cartea. That's in the Basque language. Now, this was to strengthen and spread the Basque culture, but he also encouraged all of his students to get an education, and he wanted them to get a practical education. He wanted them to be engineers. He wanted them to be doctors and things like that, because that's what the Basque country needed at that time. He encouraged some of his students found a cooperative, and the first cooperative was called Ulgor, and it was founded, I believe, in 1955. Now, the name Ulgor is simply the initials of the last names of the first five founders. Today, the Mondragon cooperatives do about $24 billion in sales. They have 289 cooperatives and other entities that are part of the corporation. And there's about 80,000 worker owners. So this is a cooperative with a long history and a large a large worker base. It is, in fact, the third largest corporation in the Basque Country, and it is probably the largest retailer in Spain. All right. Well, Ulgor was a good beginning. What it was is that the Spanish government would not give any business licenses to Basque. So what they did is they bought out a failing company. They really didn't care about the company. What they wanted was the license. So they raised money from the community to buy this failed company that made paraffin stoves. And they refounded it on a cooperative model. Now, the monies that they raised from the community would be the last time they needed any outside capital. And why was that? And that was because of the Caja Laboral, the Workers' Bank. Now, this had a very strange founding. Don Jose realized that just a cooperative by itself wouldn't be enough. They had to find funding for more cooperatives. And the way to do that was to recycle all of the bank's money and invest it in other cooperatives. Now, I say it had a strange founding. Don Jose went to his students at Ulgor and with his idea to found a bank. They were not interested. They did not wish to be bankers. So Don Jose did a very unpriestly thing. He forged their names on all the founding documents. And he sent it in, and he got the charter for the bank. Then he presented this as fait accompli to his students. And they had the choice of either sending their mentor to jail for fraud or of becoming bankers. Well, they decided to become bankers, and it was a brilliant move. The Caja turned out to be a factory. That is a place that could found new factories, new cooperatives, and expand the reach of the cooperative movement. What it was institutionalized entrepreneurship. So any worker who had an idea could take it to the Caja Laboral, and they would do all the business analysis on it. And if it was a good idea, they would provide the funding for this new cooperative. So they were able to recycle the funds within the cooperatives to form new cooperatives. Today, the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation has $26 billion, or the Caja Laboral has $26 billion in deposits and $34 billion in equity. Along with that, it also operates the Lagoon Aro, which is the social fund. As we'll see, a lot of the social functions like unemployment and retirement accounts are handled by the cooperative rather than by the government. Okay, we need to talk about the organization. Every worker owner is a member of the General Council. And the General Council is the highest authority in the company. It represents the workers as owners. But they are also members of the Social Council. And this functions as kind of a union, an internal union. The Social Council represents the owners as workers. Now notice the realism here. They realize that just being an owner, doesn't mean that you're not still a worker and that there won't be worker issues come up. So the Social Council deals with all the workshop issues, deals with pay, it deals with job descriptions, it deals with any factory floor disputes, etc., etc. Now today, it's divided into, the corporation is divided into various sectors. So there's the industrial sector, which does about $8 billion in sales. the retail sector, which does about $10 billion in sales, and the finance sector. They also operate educational institutions, grade schools, high schools, and even a university, Mondragon University. So it provides a complete social system, education, research and development, management training, retirement accounts, unemployment accounts, healthcare, things like that. In fact, they do this all without the help of the government, of course. So this may be the most libertarian system in captivity, certainly more than the libertarians have ever done. Okay, but the real test of any organization is, what does it do in hard times? I mean, in good times, everybody's a genius, everything's growing. What happens when there are troubles? So, the approach of the Mondragon Cooperative is shared hardships. So think about this. You know, when a company's getting business, their first action is to start laying off employees. How does it work in the cooperative? Well, instead of laying off, say, 10% of the employees themselves vote to lower their own pay so they can keep everybody employed. How would you like to work for a company like that? There are hard times. We share the hardship rather than, getting rid of a bunch of employees. Do you think that would increase your loyalty? Do you think that it would increase your willingness to give your best to this company? Now, in these times, the role of the caja laboral was crucial. In hard times, bank credit dries up. Companies can't borrow money. In Mondragon, it works the opposite. So the caja laboral goes into cooperatives that are having difficulty, and it analyzes their situation, and it advances the money. So the results were that in the Great Recession of the 1980s, only 3 of the 200 cooperatives failed. And these were 3 cooperatives that had just gotten started when the troubles began, and so had never reached profitability. There was no unemployment. So at a time when unemployment in the Basque region was in the 20 to 25%, everybody at Mondragon kept their jobs. Now, in the 2008 recession, only 1 of the cooperatives failed. And it was, ironically, Ulgor, the original cooperative. And in that time, they'd had a 3.9% reduction in employment. Now, that doesn't mean 3.9% unemployed. It means that a lot of the employees took early retirement, or a lot of them were found jobs in other cooperatives. The corporation operates, has a long list of cooperative principles. I want to focus on a few of them here. The first is democratic organization. So the General Council of the workers is the highest authority in the company, and it appoints the management committee and all the managers. Priority of labor. The principle you heard about in the social encyclicals, well, this is a guiding principle for the cooperative. Participatory management. That's the meaning of the social council. So it's not a matter of managers and workers. It's worker managers. They all participate in the management of the company. Solidarity in pay. Each cooperative sets its own ratio of pay from the highest to the lowest. Most of them operate at a ratio of 6 to 1. So the head of that cooperative will earn 6 times what the lowest employee makes. I think one cooperative has a ratio of 9 to 1. Well, compare that to large American corporation where the CEO to employee ratio is something like 300 to 500. They believe business is not just there to produce products, but to produce social transformation. So that's why they have such large educational systems, such large social welfare systems, retirement systems, why they're active in their communities, etc., etc. They believe in education. So along with the schools that they run, they also have management training institutes, language institutes, very, very important to speak a small language that's only spoken in one little corner of the world. They have R&D centers, things like that. Now, question here is, does this overcome the agency gap? The agency gap. Keep this term in mind because we're going to come back to it. And does it solve the organizational problem? What organizational problem? Well, again, keep that question in mind. I'm going to come back to it at the end. Let's look at another model of cooperative organization, and this is in Emilia-Romagna. That's the area in Italy around Bologna. Okay, this is a long tradition in northern Italy. It goes back well over 100 years, but it was suppressed by the fascists, just as the fascists in Spain didn't like the cooperatives. Mussolini didn't like either. So the whole thing had to be recreated after the Second World War. Today, there are over 8,000 cooperative enterprises in Emilia-Romagna, and they provide 40% of the GDP of that region. And that region maintains one of the highest living standards in Europe. Something rather peculiar about the cooperatives in Emilia-Romagna is that they're sort of political. So there's 3 main groups, and they split along party lines. So the Democrats, the Socialists, forget the third party there, but they tend to be associated with political parties, which is rather strange. But 60% of the people in the region at least belong to at least one co-op, because there's a variety of co-ops. Producer co-ops, there's consumer co-ops, and there's social service co-ops that provide government services. They have a different organizational philosophy from Mondragon. So if you look at Mondragon's organization chart, it looks pretty much like any other corporate organization chart. But in Mondragon, there is no corporate structure. I mean, in Emilia-Romagna, there is no corporate structure whatsoever. What they do is they form project-based networks. So when they bid on a project, they'll join the expertise of a group of cooperatives, and one cooperative will take the lead for this project. But in the next project, another cooperative will take the lead. This requires a high degree of trust among the cooperatives. All right, so different networks on different projects. So the key factor here is that the most important thing among the cooperatives is cooperation rather than competition. They compete on quality and service rather than price, and they're not trying to drive each other out of business. Okay. Now, they do have one structure called ERVET, which is sort of a cooperative of co-ops. They provide service centers to the individual co-ops. These service centers do things like purchasing, research, marketing, international marketing, things like that. They also run research and development centers. So they handle purchasing, as I said, marketing, strategic planning, all of those functions that might be performed by a corporate structure are performed by ERVET on sort of a voluntary basis. In addition to the production co-ops, there are social co-ops. These provide government services. There's 12,000 of these social co-ops with 280,000. And they provide 87% of the city services in this region, Italy. They deal with relational goods. So things like a welfare system are run by the co-ops. And the difference between it being provided by a government bureaucracy and being provided by co-ops is that the provider and the recipient share information, power, and responsibility. Now, reciprocity, rather than contractual exchange, is what makes the Emilia-Romagna cooperative work. They depend on systems of trust and cooperation because they're constantly forming new networks for each different job. And if co-ops can't trust each other, then the whole system would collapse. Now, this reflects exactly what Pope Benedict said in Caritas in Veritate. Today, we can say that economic life must be understood as a multi-layered phenomenon. In every one of these layers, to varying degrees and in ways specifically suited to each, the aspect of fraternal reciprocity must be present. So Benedict wasn't talking about some abstract ideal. It was something that was on the ground and working. As a matter of fact, his advisor, his economic advisor on that particular encyclical, was an expert in the Emilia-Romagna cooperatives. Okay, so it's a system of voluntary mutual favors. So goodwill is more important than contract. Look at the cooperative movement worldwide. Another example we can point to is the Fabricas sin Patrones. In 2001 in Argentina, there was this economic crisis. The people of Buenos Aires at one night noticed that there was a long line of armored cars headed to the airport. That was rather strange. What was happening? Well, in the morning they found out. Because in the morning, all bank accounts in the country were frozen. You couldn't withdraw your money. You couldn't write a check. There was no cash in the ATM machine. But the rich had been warned the night before, and they withdrew all their money and put it on planes to go to Spain. So thousands of businesses went bankrupt and left their wages unpaid, the owners having shipped their money out of the country. Now, 300 factories were then taken over by the workers. What's amazing is that these factories, which failed under the private owners, were made to work with worker ownership. And in fact, only 3 have failed. 50 have received legal status. In Japan, they have an extensive system of consumer co-op. So about 17 million people, or 1/3 of the country, belong to one of these co-ops. Agricultural co-ops they have about 6 million people. And there's a cooperative bank, the Norinchukin Bank, with $530 billion in assets, and is in fact the 31st largest bank in the world. And there are worker co-ops with, I think that's supposed to be 150,000 workers. Now, the International Cooperative Association runs a database, but nobody really knows how many cooperatives there are throughout the world. They list about 2,000 cooperatives in 56 countries, but that's only a small part because very few of the cooperatives belong to the IC. The turnover they can measure for cooperatives is about $2.6 trillion. And with co-ops are doing over 100 million, there's about 1,400 in 42 countries. So this is not a trivial enterprise. It's not confined to a few, crazy corners. It's a worldwide movement of some importance. All right, the UN did a survey in 2014, and they found 2.6 million co-ops with 1 billion members or clients, and approximately 13 million employees. Now, this doesn't include the cooperatives of China. Chinese agriculture is organized along cooperative lines, but the cooperatives are pretty much an agent of the government, so it's hard to include them in the movement. In any case, the UN determined that these cooperatives had $20 trillion and did $3 trillion of revenue, at that time about 4% of world GDP. Let's talk about another form of organization, codetermination. Now, think about the shareholder model. Okay? This has been dominant. It's been dominant for 200 or 300 years, but since the 1980s, the idea that companies existed to serve the shareholders was written into law. So the shareholder interests in American law have to come first. This leads to some problems because now managers, CEOs, are compensated on how much they can goose the stock price. This leads to short-termism because it's very easy to goose the stock price for a short period of time. There's the old joke about the MBA who burned all the furniture and then boasted that he had lowered the heating bills. So there's lots of ways to boost the stock price short term, just when you're willing to cash out. This leads to a decline in investment in things like R&D and reduced productivity growth and ballooning executive pay. Think about this. In the 1960s and the 1970s, executive pay was maybe 20 times what the worker might earn. That isn't as low as Mondragon, but it's far below the 300 to 500 times that we have today. At the same time, this encouraged stagnating worker pay, because again, the whole idea was to boost the stock price. That's the only thing that counted. And then 5 million, that number's much too low, but millions and millions of jobs have been outsourced. That's another way of boosting the stock price. And it leads to reduced social cohesion. Think about all the anger. Well, this is one of the reasons. Well, there's another model. It's the stakeholder model. And that works by codetermination. Employees elect members to the board of directors. They elect 1/3 of the directors in small companies and 1/2 of the board of directors in large companies are elected by the employer. So this is used in 2/3 of European Union countries. These directors have the same access to the books as any other director. They have the same access to management debates, to high-level management. So the workers have a real voice in the management of the company. In addition to electing members to the board of directors, there are work councils. You can think of these as sort of the codetermination equivalent of the Mondragon Social Council. So they're employee representatives at the shop floor level. They're consulted on all decisions, whether decisions about pay, decisions about working conditions, working hours, etc. So work rules, reorganizations, disciplinary action, etc. Now they're not quite the same as a union because the union deals with industry-wide issues. In Germany, for example, pay is set industry-wide in negotiation with unions. This prevents one company from undercutting the prices of another company simply by lowering the pay. So if you want to lower costs, you have to increase the productivity of the workers. You can't just lower their. So this is a completely different model of management. What are the benefits? Well, now everybody is concerned with the long-term prosperity. There is no short-termism as you see in American corporations. It does result in higher worker pay and lower executive compensation. It also results in higher skilled workers. Remember, you can't just lower costs by lowering employees' pay. So you need more and more skilled workers, which means you have to put more and more effort into training workers, more and more effort into things which increase their productivity. It results in more automation, not less. Workers aren't opposed to automation. They're opposed to being automated out of a job. And this enables them to resist outsourcing, or at least to make intelligent decisions about when outsourcing is advantageous to everybody. But mostly, it leads to more industrial and social peace. Everybody's considered part of the enterprise. So you don't have that same management labor opposition that you have in the United States right now. Think about the three models. There's the shareholder model. Well, that's what we have in the United States. By law, everything must be done to increase shareholder value, period and sentence. Its one telos is to increase the share price. There's the stakeholder model. Now, its telos is the welfare of all participants, owners, the workers, the community, etc. And finally, there's the common good model. Harmonize all of the interests, including the wider community. Now, I want to close by talking about theory and practice. One thing about abstract theories is that they always work, always, in theory. But they never work in practice. Capitalist theory preaches small government and a healthy economy. Capitalist practice always leads to big government because big government and big business grow together. Communism, great theory. It only works in a monastery. So always judge theories by their practice. This is equally true for Catholic social teaching. If there's no working models, it doesn't count. You can discard the whole thing. Let's talk now about the investor's dilemma. So there's this model where you can increase profits by lowering wages, right? But that only works to narrow the consumer market. Because here's an undeniable truth. Each firm's wage bill is every other firm's demand curve. Investment opportunities depend on a robust consumer market. So the investor fires workers, makes more money, he has no place to invest the funds. And so you get idle capital. Worse, the investors start turning to speculation. And it's very important to understand the difference between investment and speculation. Investment means supplying funds for production and expansion. It's perhaps the most basic function in any business. Why? Because production is always a process in time. There's always a gap between the planting and the harvest, between the raw material and the finished good, between the product idea and the product line. This gap must be financed. And so finance, investment, is just that necessary, crucial function without which nothing good can happen. Speculation, however, is a bet on the direction of a particular market without supplying any funds to that market. Now, the stock market, as it turns out, we talk about the stock market as investing. It's not. 95% of the stock market is speculation. Why? Because you're just buying used shares. When you buy a share of General Motors, you're not providing any funds to General Motors. So you might think of it as, when you buy a used car, a used Chevrolet, you don't provide any funds to General Motors. Well, when you buy a share of stock, that share of stock was probably issued in 1920. You're not providing any funds. You're just making a bet on the direction of the market. So investment is win-win or lose-lose. You invest in something, it expands production, it provides new product, it provides new jobs, everybody wins. Or it loses and everybody loses their investment. But speculation is win-lose. Okay, for every winner, there's a loser. For every person who bought a stock that rose, there's a person who sold the stock and didn't get advantage of that rise. So it has zero net social value. And it explains today why we have this tremendous oversupply of capital. Banks have $2.5 trillion in excess reserves, and business has at least that much in money that they cannot find a place to invest. This is the odd thing here is that there's even less need for capital today. Now think about the start of the Industrial Revolution, and you had these huge factories. They cost millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to establish. But today the cost of tools has declined by an order of magnitude. I remember a job that I had use aircraft just at the beginning of the computer revolution. We had numerical control machines. These were investments. Each machine of $750,000 to $1.5 million. Well, today you can get sophisticated CNC cutting materials, cutting machines, for a few $1,000s. You don't need the capitals that you used to need. So 3D printers, cheap CNC cutting and milling, things like this. And by the way, that's the hidden meaning of outsourcing. So Ricardo assumed that you could have free trade because you couldn't move factories around the country to another easily. So he could develop these theories in an age when capital wasn't as mobile as it is today. But in fact, when you can establish factories cheaply in Honduras or Bangladesh, Malaysia, capital has no, you just don't need the capitals that you need to have, and outsourcing can be done a lot more easily than it ever could be done. So this leads to a question of, do we need a new model? Capitalism has never solved its demand problem. Never. It can never clear its own markets. It's always Keynesianism. It always requires government support. Now, don't tell me you're for Keynes or against Keynes. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's just a requirement. Whether it's conservative, liberal, it doesn't matter. They all use the Keynesian model because it's the only one that works. It has the wrong mathematics. It doesn't realize the codependency of supply and demand. So we have to throw out these old non-working theories and look to working theories. We need to look not just at theory, but at praxis. And praxis is the name I give to that combination of theory and practice. Practice. You can never look at a theory alone. You have to look at how it works on the ground. Okay. So, I think there are some questions raised here by this presentation. Should there be employee ownership? Questions we can pose to the co-ops. Do employees have some right to own? Now we can point to how successful it is. That is enough to justify it, but you still have to ask, well, is wealth created just by capital? Or is it created by capital and labor? And if it is created by capital and labor, okay, does the employees then have some right to own what's produced? All right. I'll know you have questions on this, and I look forward to looking at these questions on the discussion board. So feel free to fire away. We'll discuss all of this when we meet in the study group.